whore, harlot, lady of the night, scarlet woman, broad, Jezebel, floozy, strumpet, man-eater, and working girl. These are all terms used through history to describe promiscuous women. Let's talk about it.
Thousands of years ago, power was mostly gained through physical violence and maintained through brute strength. There was little need for subtlety. A king or emperor had to be merciless. Only a select few had power, but no one suffered under the scheme of things more than women. They had no way to compete, no weapon at their disposal that could make a man do what they wanted, politically, socially, or even in the home. Of course, men had one weakness: their insatiable desire for sex. A woman could always toy with this desire, but once she gave in to sex, the man was back in control. And if she withheld sex, he could simply look elsewhere or exert force. What good is a power that is so temporary and frail? Yet women had no choice but to submit to this condition. There were some, though, whose hunger for power was too great, and who over the years, through much cleverness, creativity, invented a way to turn the dynamic around, creating a more lasting and effective form of power. These women, among them Bathsheba of the Old Testament, Helen of Troy, the Chinese siren she, and the greatest of them all, Cleopatra, invented seduction. The art of seduction, Robert Greene.
The greatest of them all, Cleopatra. We'll see about it. All right, so today we're obviously discussing Cleopatra. 69 or 70. She was born in either 69 or 70 BC. Obviously, there was no computer system. Records are a little iffy. She had a few siblings. One, two of her brothers, Ptolemy the 13th, who was about 6 years younger than her, and Ptolemy the 14th, who was about 9 years younger than her. For the sake of this video, we're just gonna call them the 13th for the older of the brothers and 14th for the younger of the brothers. She had a sister also, but she's less consequential, so we're gonna skip her for now. Her father obviously would be Ptolemy the 12th, right? Who was the pharaoh of the time. Her being born to a pharaoh, being royalty, she was educated in Alexandria. Alexandria, named from Alexander the Great, which had the greatest library in the world. I think this is important. Her education was thorough. She studied law, military strategy, chemistry, very important, medicine, economics, agriculture, and maybe most importantly, public relations. Also languages that she spoke: Aramaic, Ethiopian, Greek, Egyptian, which may seem obvious, but she was actually the only one of her family that bothered to learn it. Arabic, Syriac, Median, Parthian, and Troglodyte. So while she's known for being a great seductress, I believe her education and her intelligence is what separates her. But we're going to get into that. All right, so we're going to fast forward to when she's 11 years old. She has a half-sister who decides to take power away from her father and overthrows him. So her and her father flee to Rome. I believe this is where she has her first experiences with Rome. The culture, the customs, the political system, the ambiance, all of that. She's exposed to it at 11. But most importantly, what she was exposed to at 11 was the fact that her father came back with Rome to take back power from her half-sister. So her father convinced Rome to help him, came back to Egypt, retook the throne. And through that, she saw how, number one, how ruthless she had to be to maintain power. And number two, the military power of Rome. But at the same time, her father did owe Rome money. He had a gambling and spending problem, and that's going to play a part in this. But they come back, everything's good. Then her and her older of the brothers become co-rulers after the death of their father. But they have a very strenuous relationship. She's doing things like minting her own face on coins, and they both want power. But he exiles her. He's about 18, right? Tells her kick rocks. Now, mind you, he's about 12 years old right now, the older of the brothers. So she's stuck in southern Egypt with really no resources but her education and her youth. But it just so happens that after a couple years of being in exile back in Rome, Julius Caesar is engaged in a battle with Pompey, who he's beating. And Pompey flees to Egypt to escape Caesar and hopefully regroup and come back. And Caesar's in hot pursuit. But when Pompey gets to Egypt and he's looking for basically asylum, her brother decides, you know what? If I kill Pompey, that will win me a little bit of favor with Rome, who's obviously the biggest power in the world. And so he kills Pompey and actually presents his head to Caesar when Caesar gets there. Caesar's actually upset about this. He's actually so upset that he demands the money that their father owed Rome.
Well, yeah. Listen, you got money for that fucking commercial, you fucking commercial. You don't got my money. You don't got my fucking money.
So that he can pay for him and his men to go back to Rome with the money that was owed to them for wasting their time chasing Pompey. So basically, Ptolemy says, okay, I'll get you your money. You know what? Just why don't you go in one of our suites, all right? Room service on us, 5-star treatment, the equivalent of the Ritz-Carlton. And so this information gets back to Cleopatra, who's exiled in the south of Egypt. Through her experience, knowing what Rome could do, she hatches an ingenious plan, right? Because number one, she's exiled. So what she does is she has her servants roll her up in a rug, okay? Stick with me. And they carry her for miles to where Julius Caesar is staying in his suite, right? A very bold action. Number one, this is Egypt in the middle of the day. She's rolled up in a rug. It's dangerously hot in the rug. If she gets caught re-entering certain areas, she could be killed. But she takes the risk and she's delivered to Caesar and rolled out in the rug and presented to him, right? Now, I think this is a good time to pause and say, what does she look like? Honestly, we don't know. There's not a definitive portrait of her. She's been called everything from gorgeous, the most beautiful woman on earth, to hideous, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples of different depictions of her, right? So, not that one. But in my mind, I'm saying she looks like Kim Kardashian. So, but let's say she didn't, right? This is why I say her education was more instrumental in her power than her beauty. So we underline here, she knew chemistry. So what she did was she ingested a poison that made your pupils dilate, right, before visiting Caesar. And what this does is show attraction to the person that you're conversing with without directly saying it, right? It's a very subtle way. It's really a subconscious thing, right? If your pupils are dilated and you're talking to the other person and you're showing interest, they're going to think you want to sleep with them, right? I've heard this is also an effect when you take ecstasy, something similar happens physically. Also, what she does with her chemistry skills is take a little bit of poison, just a little bit of poison on her lips, enough to make them swell slightly, right? This is another subconscious thing. Obviously, her lips look bigger. It's something that's attractive to more men, and it gives subtle sexual vibes. And at this time, she's about 20, in her early 20s. Caesar's in his 50s, right? So even if she wasn't the best looking thing, I'm sure he wasn't turning it down. Never mind that he was married back in Rome. That's beyond the point. So she was 22, he was 52, right? Not a hard sell. Now, another factor, the national language of Rome was actually Latin, which, if you don't see on this list, is because she didn't speak Latin. But where she lucked out is they both spoke Greek, right? So that's how they were able to converse. She obviously conducted a successful seduction, right? And then she convinces him that the throne's rightfully hers. So buddy that exiled her, he gotta go. And you know what? Caesar agrees. Now, was it through the fact that he was smitten with her, or did he want to have more control over Egypt via her? We don't know. But what we do know is that Caesar took his troops and attacked her brother, Ptolemy the 13th. Her brother was fleeing on the Nile, and he ended up drowning in the Nile River. And so she and the younger brother become co-rulers, right? Another co-ruler situation. Also, one of the reasons that we know that she was successful in the seduction is that her and JC, 9 months later, have a son, right? Now, while Julius Caesar doesn't ever publicly acknowledge the child or admit to being the father, but her child's last name was Caesar. So she did it for him, basically. Okay, so she's in power with her brother. She has a son by the most powerful man in the world. I'd say bag secured. It was also said that through her medicine and chemistry, she would test poisons and medicines on prisoners to see the effect. I'll say that's 1 point for negative. That's pretty close to what they was doing in concentration camps, right? So check one for the negative. Or maybe that's their sentence, I don't know. All right, so everything's good for about 7 years, right? So this will bring her to about 29. Unfortunately for her, Julius Caesar is back in Rome and they're tired of him. So he's assassinated. So now her connection to Rome and her power base is pretty much severed, right? Even though she has a son by Caesar, he's no longer living. So that's not much value to her anymore. With her losing her power base, you know what? She makes a decision. She can't afford to take any more chances, right? So, eldest brother gone. Now, the 15-year-old Ptolemy the 14th is poisoned by her, right? She uses that chemistry skills. She knows what she's doing. She's been practicing all week, son.
I've been planning it all week, son.
And she poisons her other brother. Now she's the sole ruler, right? Because she figured if anything was to ever happen, he was to try to control power. She's called up Caesar. Listen, we got a problem. And he'll basically squash that for her. But now that he's gone, he got to go too. Okay, so now we're in a situation where she's the sole ruler, but you know what? It's nice having Rome around. So after Caesar's death, Rome is split into Eastern and Western Empire, right? And so Octavian takes the Western, controls that, and one of Caesar's top generals, Mark Antony, controls the Eastern. Okay, so her always being on the lookout for the next opportunity hears that he has a fleet on the Nile. So what she does is she gets a golden yacht, equivalent of a yacht, and she dresses up as a Egyptian goddess, and she sails over to introduce herself to him. So now there's this big spectacle, right? She's pulling up on a golden yacht, on the front dressed as a goddess, right? And also, she's chemistry of the time. She actually has cosmetics. And trust me, you know what them cosmetics do. A little bit of foundation, concealer, mascara. I don't know any other stuff, but I'm sure you've seen on YouTube, people could absolutely transform. So whether she's ugly or not, she has that going for her. So she comes and she meets him, and it's chemistry, pardon the pun, at first sight, right? So they have a whirlwind romance, and guess what? Now she has another attachment to Rome. Well, yes, it's only the Eastern Roman Empire, but it's more than enough. And at this time, Mark Antony is about 42, right? To her, 29. A little bit better. And much like Caesar, he was also married in Rome, but we're not going to let that get in the way of anything. And how do we know that she was successful in his seduction? Well, she had twins from him. So 2 baby daddies, 2 Roman emperors, and 3 kids. better record than some of y'all out there, but we're not gonna talk about that. So with her power base back under her, now she feels secure. She goes and she starts showing off her power and wealth, right? She starts having giant hieroglyphs and statues erected of herself, and spends exceedingly lavishly. There's actually a story where she brags to him that she can spend the equivalent of $100 million in one dinner. And when he says that's not possible, she takes one of the rarest pearls, dissolves it, puts it in wine and drinks it, and then it says there, it blew 100 million. So you might say that the power is going to her head, but she earned it technically, so she can do what she wants. By modern estimates, her wealth at this time was equivalent to, I'm gonna have to write it out for you because sometimes you have to visually see it, right? So her wealth was estimated to be 96 billion in today's money, right? So she can do whatever she wants. As I stated, they had a very toxic romance, I'll say. At this time, they were both drinking excessively, and they would do things like run around and literally prank people like regular Egyptian citizens, get into drunken fights, just be super toxic. Remember I said we had East and Western Rome, right? So Mark Antony, her lover, was Eastern, and then the Western Rome was Octavian, who heard about the exploits and he used this to his advantage, right? She's not the only smart one. So he starts convincing people that she's the real power. And number one, the fact that she was a woman. Number two, the fact that she wasn't even Roman. It wasn't hard to convince people that Mark Antony had to go, right? So he stripped of his title, and Octavian actually goes to Egypt to attack. And during the battle, she flees and leaves Mark Antony and his troops behind, which I wouldn't blame her, you know, even though she was commanding an army since she was 21, she is still a woman, and if she doesn't want to fight in a bloody battle, then I don't blame her for that. So he pursues after her being a simp. Them obviously leaving their troops behind wasn't very smart. So they basically go back to Egypt and are cornered. The Western Roman Legion, we'll call them, is moving in, and Mark Antony actually commits suicide. He dies in her arms, and her being the dramatic woman that she is, obviously you can see with the rug and the yacht and the lavish spending, she decides she's gonna die too, because she knows that Octavian would like nothing more than to have her captured and dragged to Rome as a example and a spectacle. She commits suicide via snake bite, right? They say it was a cobra. Now, this is what I've heard from books and my research, but it's not actually confirmed. But just know she commits, oh, I don't think I'm allowed to say that. They both off themselves, right? Him via sword or whatever, her snake bite. That was her last dramatic display. So, and the Cleopatra in Rome basically overtakes Egypt. They go from a great sovereign nation with its own culture to just being under Rome's empire. And that's the story of Cleopatra. Now, so this is a checklist for psychopathy, right? So let's look at what's on here and compare it to what we know of her. Okay, so superficial charm, that's a maybe, right? We didn't know her personality, so we'll skip over that. We'll say she doesn't have that. Grandiose sense of self-worth, I believe so. Need for stimulation and boredom, check. Pathological lying, check. Cunning and manipulative, matter of fact, cunning and manipulative, we're gonna put 2 here. And lack of remorse. One story that I left out that shows the lack of remorse is, remember I mentioned she had a sister, right? Through all this stuff, all the battling, her sister actually went to a religious site, right? And basically exiled herself. She had no interest in the throne, no interest in power. She just wanted to live a normal life. She was an equivalent of a monastery, right? And so through the Egyptian customs, her sister was not allowed to have her attack or attack her while she was there. But Mark Antony could. So she actually convinced him. Remember I said they was toxic. She said, if you love me, you'll go kill my sister, because even though she doesn't want the throne and she's not a technical threat to me at this time, she still has royal blood, and if she ever wanted to, she can come back and get the throne. So you gotta go kill my sister too. 2 siblings killed by her orders or herself, and another one killed by proxy of a war that she started, right? So I would say 5 out of 6 is a decent chance that she was a psychopath. Now, obviously, we went through her timeline. Now, was it her fault? Since the age of 11, she's been dealing with turmoil and family killing family for the throne. A very important point to all of this is that they say history is written by the winners, right? So obviously Rome hadn't liked her since basically she was with Julius Caesar, right? And all the accounts from that time of her come from Rome. So obviously, if you don't like somebody and you're writing their historical narrative, you're going to paint them as a villain. So she might not have been as bad as they say she was. That's an important distinction to keep in mind. It was said by Shakespeare, who obviously came along a lot later, that she was more cunning than man's thoughts, right? And this is something I can absolutely agree with. Now, I don't fault her for anything that she's done. I think she's justified in a lot of things. But while we're talking about it, is she's an exaggerated example of a still modern condition. What's that condition? Women using their power of seduction to manipulate powerful men. As we discussed, she's extremely intelligent and also ruthless. And she needed that initially to gain and maintain power, but I think it morphed into something else. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, it didn't matter who was in that position as leader of Rome, the 52-year-old Julius Caesar or the 42-year-old Mark Antony. It could have been Octavian. It could have been Flavor Flav in that position. She was going to go after and try to conquer that person. For young men, as we elevate our status, socially, politically, monetarily, etc., we become targets for women who are also bright, right? And they know that most young, ambitious men have a weakness of sexual desire and excitement in their life.
Therefore, let us not get lax in our vigilance or our relationship dynamics and maintain a firm and disciplined grip on reality. Our final message to you is don't send your forces to fight in someone else's battle while ignoring your empire, even if your power is unmatched.